Are you showing that slide?
Started this so we can get this through. My name is Amy Walker. I'm with the Department of Conservation, Division of Soil and Water. I'm the Eastern Area Manager, and my home office is out of Rappahannock. And so what we'll be talking about today is a whole farm approach. And this was created to try to capture as much data for the stewardship practices the farmers do. It is often not captured. So a little bit of background, this will be helpful, not the most exciting, but in 2017, soil and water conservation districts were given some tables of milestones for their areas within their service boundaries. During the regional meeting, secretaries and deputy secretaries, DCR partners met with producers in specific areas to kind of go over the Bay-Witt model and some of the tables. And this was when the producers began to realize that their stewardship practices were not necessarily being counted. And for row crop agronomic areas, so we were working with 3 rivers, it was drastically off compared to what they felt they were doing in the field. And so this was begun to try to capture some of what they're actually doing outside of that. And so what they were looking at is this, and this was what was concerning. Nutrient management placement, rate, and timing, as well as phosphorus, particularly for the 3 Rivers District, they had goose eggs. And for most row crops, they are doing split applications, they're doing multiple split applications, variable rate nitrogen, variable rate phosphorus, and they were getting no credit. And so this was a little bit alarming to them as they're going through these meetings on why they were not getting credit. And what most didn't know is that for the VAX practice, which is the Virginia Agricultural Cost Share Program, you sign up for a contract. Depending on the funding they have available will depend on if your contracts get approved. If they are not approved due to lack of funding, or the practice wasn't inspected, or it wasn't completed properly, there is no credit. And so that's where you start to see this. While they may have signed up, for example, for multiple split on nitrogen, if the district didn't have the funding to pay for that, their contract was canceled and it wasn't counted at all. And so that began the impetus to try to find a way to kind of correct that. Next slide. And so DTR, nutrient management specialist, and the technical district manager at 3 Rivers sat down and tried to figure out a way, how are we going to capture all of this? Have the producers come in, give us everything they're doing everywhere. And so there were stakeholder meetings held as well. And what came out of that, there are a number of producers that had quit utilizing the VAX program because they were regularly not funded. The larger your operation, the higher the cost efficiency, the more likely you were to get paid. And therefore, it tended, if you had a smaller operation, you were not getting funded, and most of them had eventually given up on the program. And so we also wanted to invite some of them. How can we get you reinvigorated in the VAX? What came out of that is that all wanted their data reported, because again, they were alarmed that the service area was getting 0 credit, even for something as simple as split nitrogen. They all wanted the program cost share to be comparable to VAX rates. This was going to be a little bit of a challenge, and they all wanted certain annual practices to be included, which ended up being everything a row crop producer tends to sign up for every single year, which tends to be nutrient management and cover crop. And they all wanted a guaranteed level of funding. And this was key, so that if you were a smaller operation, you were not automatic, you weren't going to get kicked out. You would stay whole within the program and receive a portion of funding. Next slide. And so in building this, we decided we took established standards and specs that were in the VAX manual. Those already received Bay model credit. There was no point in reinventing the wheel. And we also have to capture additional cover crop data such as late planting. This late planting date has since been incorporated into the VAX manual. And then to help keep cost share rates normalized, rates for each practice would have to be reduced, but the components would stack, because there was no way you could pay full rate for every practice, especially on years that were limited cost share funding. It wouldn't have been practical. And then to ensure guaranteed funding, there was a rate established for core nutrient management. If you could do nothing but get a nutrient management plan, your efforts for coming in, showing everything you've got, you were provided a cost share incentive for that. And additionally, for this pilot program, there was no ranking. And so nobody could fall out of the program. If you signed up, you were guaranteed funding, even if nothing else went well. That includes you got 75 inches of rain and you couldn't get anything done. The ground was so hard, you couldn't do some of your nutrient management practices. Next slide. And so what we had done is in building the practices, we bundled all of the components of a standard VAX. In-furrow and banded was not available in the VAX program, but you can get model credit replacement. So that was inserted. First side dress, second side dress. These are all components of existing VAX practices, whether it's split application on small grains, split application on corn, variable rate nitrogen, or variable rate phosphorus. Next slide. Cover crop, same thing. We took the standard VAX practices for cover crop and included them. However, we did add a late kill down for rye. This was to try to keep the cover crop on the ground longer, past the established date in the manual. But again, they were just all rolled into one. And here's kind of the comparisons. If you are familiar with the VAX manual at all, this is what the standard VAX is right now. And these were the components that we pulled out. Again, late rye has the SL8B because that has since been implemented. Those later dates were implemented into the VAX manual. As mentioned, in-furrow banded nitrogen and phosphorus were not in the VAX manual, those were added. Core nutrient management. This did not pay for the nutrient management plan. This was an incentive to have a producer come in, open their books, give you everything they're doing because it takes a lot of time. And that's what it came down to, is you're paying for them to come and sit down for an hour or two or more, depending on the size of their operation, and give you everything they're doing everywhere. It's a very time-consuming process. But if you were unable to do cover crops, if you were unable to do some nutrient management, you knew that at least you got paid for coming in and providing this information. Next slide. And so the results, this was very, very well received. By the second year, they had almost 100% participation within their service area because they realized the benefits that they were receiving. And so by sign up for the prior year, for 2019, these were the values that they received. This was what they got with the whole farm approach, and these are acres. You do see 2020 VAX. First year, not everybody signed on. Not everybody wanted to do this. If you were a very large farmer, you were pretty much guaranteed funding on cover crop, you got more through VAX. And so, you still have some folks that are signing up through traditional VAX practices. Right here, the core nutrient management is 81,000. That was a must. You had to at least have a nutrient management plan for any of this to work. A lot of folks went through the NM1A, which is a payment for the nutrient management plan. And this number is higher because there are some producers in the area that write their own. And so that number is going to be higher because they did not need a payment through NM1A, they're writing their own plan. But you'll see just in the nutrient management plan acres alone, it exceeded, but this was really where it started to come together. Next slide. But it was expensive. And so the funding amounts really started to rack up as this gets. And so this was what was funded. This is going to be key to take a look at these two values. This is what 2019 was prior year. This was a year, obviously, very low funding. Next slide. And this was the end price total, $2 million. You did receive a whole lot of acreage for these dollars. If you look at those, if you're remembering from the previous slide, this though was acknowledged that this was a heavy hitter. That was very expensive to pay that. And so in moving forward, we're going to be looking at the rates for that core nutrient management. They're in, they enjoyed the program. It was extremely successful. So the dollar amounts that they were getting were probably a little bit high. And so it will be moving forward. Those rates are going to be lower because this was a big chunk of change in terms of versus implementation. Next slide. What does this mean in the end? So going back to what the district saw, they saw this. They saw these goose eggs. This was what's available in the Bay model. This is going back to the discussion James had earlier. This is addressing that orange bar that is very large, no matter which way you look at it. Agriculture has a lot to do, but this is what they were doing anyway. If we can capture this, through the VAX program, then I think that each of the districts, if this can take flight, would be extremely beneficial, because it's, again, reporting what they're actually doing. And as the producers saw their numbers start to skyrocket, again, that second year, they had almost 100% participation, because they truly understand that agriculture is going to come to bear as the WIP model tends to progress, and to try to capture what you can is going to be vital. Next slide. And so this is the official numbers that were collected. You're going to see some caps. That has to do with verification. That's a whole different talk. But again, these values are a whole lot higher than the goose eggs that we're getting previously. And this is really what has spurred the producers in that area to want to be involved and to be going along with this pilot project, because each of these components pays less than the standard VAX program. So there had to be some buy-in for them to really take hold of it, participate to almost 100%. Again, there's 92,000 acres. According to the FSA office, they captured 91.77 acres. So they were getting good participation and definite buy-in. Go ahead. And this is the percentages. Again, goose eggs, this is just showing the percentage that they were able to meet. This is one district, 2-year pilot program. If we can do this and spread this across at least the agronomic districts, across the agronomic portion of the state, I think it will really be benefiting the Commonwealth as a whole towards meeting this big model and taking a big chunk out of the lower slice of pie. So the next steps, again, so I just got the 2020 data, and so those were some slides that we had seen, but the implementation project has something that there's some changes needed. Data entry and management at the district level was atrocious. Because again, those were all standard VAX practices. When they opened up their agricultural tracking program, they saw every measure for every practice in this long scroll sheet, and it made it very tedious. To review the rates, again, it was noted that the rates for having them come in and talk to the district were a little bit high. Drop those rates, because particularly nutrient management, the benefit is there within just the bundle itself. Language clarifications, we have to make sure it matches into the VAX programs, because the VAX program is updated every year. So we have to make sure that it's consistent, and then ensuring the practice specifications again match those VAX, because that's been a challenge up to date. Next slide. So currently, the whole farm approach has gone to the nutrient management and cover crop subcommittee of the TAC, which means that this is going to be moving forward to become a VAX practice next year in the manual. It's under review, so they're reviewing the practices that are included. They're reviewing the rates for each of the components, and they're also reviewing the language. So this has gone from a pilot program and will be available at least regionally through the VAX manual next year. Additional bundle programs are being worked on for grazing lands and soil health bundle as well. So the nutrient management is going to be a core, and then depending on your regional area, you can choose a cover crop bundle. They're working on the grazing lands bundle and a soil health bundle that you can then stack on top of it. Next slide. And that is it. What I would say is, with the whole farm approach, the producers in the Three Rivers area took to heart the meetings that they had with the secretaries of DEQ, and wanting to be able to prove that at least, you know, within their service area, with what they're doing, that they're a whole lot better than zeros and goose eggs. They're already implementing it. They're already good stewards. And so that helped with the buy-in on this program. The technical manager also sold it. You know, he convinced them this is the way to go, and he sold it. If this is going to succeed in some of the other row crop areas, they're going to have just as interested district service conservation specialists that are going to sell it. They're going to see the benefit of having these bundled approaches, being able to capture all of that data for nutrient management to help take a chunk out of that orange slice. Because I think that the stewardship already going on in the Commonwealth, that it would be met fairly, at least improvements would be seen very quickly if we can show what they're already doing on the ground as the stewards that they tend to be. That is it. Do you all have any questions?
Got 30, but
that's fine.
Thank you so much for coming and giving this presentation. I'm on the TAC, and we were all really excited about getting this in the manual. I'm curious, what does this do to technical assistance dollars for the district staff are tied to practices in the middle ground? How is that working? Are we getting as much, more, or less TA for this whole approach?
The TA would be the same percentage.
Okay.
And even with the pilot project, it was the same percentage that they would have received through the VAX program, at about 13%. And so the technical assistance would not change with this. It would be an option. You would know earlier that it wasn't ranked. Well, that's not going to be feasible, opening it up regionally or opening up to the state. So we're working on that now to try to have a ranking mechanism that would automatically float this to the top, particularly nutrient management. Because honestly, what the producer says, instead of trying to split between their corn and their soybeans and whatever they may be doing on highly managed haylands, they could come in and sit down and go step by step by step. So you could hit your first application, your second application. It was much easier for them to sign up for nutrient management practices because it was much more sequential versus looking at 6 different practices in the manual. They're looking at one, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And that also alleviates the problem. With variable rate, you have to have at least a third split. Depending on the time of year, if there is no rain for 60 days, then you're not going to be applying that. And so normally you would have to cancel your contract. You were not able to get that last split on. The program year is about ending. But with this, you can, if you're talking with producers as they're going through this, you can say, hey, look, do you think you're going to be able to get this on? They can say no. And that line comes off. You don't have to cancel the whole practice, and you're able to keep, well, they got 2 splits on it. So that's would then be a multiple split practice that you're still getting credit for and would still convey over to the Bay model.
Did all producers have a formal nutrient management plan, or did each of them, some may have had a formal state certified nutrient management plan of some? I just presume that some did not.
They either went through a TSP or a state planner, or they wrote their own, but they're certified nutrient management planners. So they were all certified nutrient management plans. So
through the whole farm approach, they all were, but coming into it, did they all have certified nutrient plans when they were first introduced?
Most of them did. Those producers that were outside that had quit using it. Even in the manual, there's the caveat that if you're kind of a new, which some of them would be considered new, they hadn't participated in 5 years or more, then there are caveats. If you're a new producer, the steps that you would move forward going through there, and so it would still qualify.
And as a follow-up, nutrient management plans are valid for 3 years, and so then for this whole farm approach, are they contracted some kind of way to mention the 10 years? Or?
No, this is purely an annual practice. And for a lot of the row crops, the plans range from anywhere from 18 months to 3 years. And that's just because of the changes that are constantly happening with the row crop rotations, cover crop. And so they all had it, but it might have been in like an 18-month nutrient management plan. But no, this is purely annual practice. And that's the only reason no-till is not in there. Otherwise, because no-till is a 5-year practice, the lifespans, you cannot guarantee funding every year for VAX. It doesn't work.
But if you get that 5-year no-till there, wouldn't that shoot up the reductions?
It would, but that's part of VAX. That was a challenge because we couldn't guarantee the 5 years of the whole farm approach portion funding. Because if you've got a lot of cover crop and you've got a lot of nutrient management, VAX can't guarantee that funding for your district for 5 years. So those things have all been considered, and they're still looking at now. That's why they're looking at alternate bundles, a soil health bundle or a grazing bundle, because you can address those expanded lifespans with a separate bundle that's not tied quite so annually.
So the way you presented this information is that a lot of this work was already happening, was already being implemented, already common practice among those producers in that region. So in effect, we paid $2 million to collect data.
Yeah, because it's what they have found is in a lot of areas, producers are not going to give up their data voluntarily. It was not a position that worked. It just wasn't. And there are some folks that would, if they saw the incentive for an additional split, then they would do that. If they saw the incentive for cover crop, then they would do that. There are producers that if they cannot receive the funding, they can't afford to put the cover crop down without some sort of incentive payment. So I shouldn't say that, yes, they're paying for something that was done, because that's not necessarily true. But for corn, for nitrogen splits, you know, these were things that the districts generally did not have enough funding to assist to help with implementing. But certainly as you step up with nutrient management, if you have incentives, you're going to see more implementation, and the same with cover crop. If you see more implementation, if you're able to assist with some of the incentives.
Two questions about the WIP is in areas that there's 10 or more districts, I think, that were listed that they achieve everything and the whole state's kind of taken care of. Is this one of them? Was that one of that?
Three Rivers was one. I think that's how they were kind of chosen as a pilot project, but they were also chosen because it's known that in that area they have some pretty progressive farmers. And so you'd be able to capture the full range from, you know, a single split application of corn to variable rate. I mean, the equipment that they're using is phenomenal. And so they are one of them, but I think that putting everything on the shoulders of 10 districts, and staffing wise, implementation wise, that if you could get some of the others, particularly heavy agronomic, that it would certainly help tremendously. Because they shouldn't be, the other districts should not be discounted because they were not one of the big 10.
Right, and I think it was those 10 and 75%. Yeah. All the districts have work to do. You know, those